9-dog taxman at the airport. When they check his backpack, everyone is stunned. A cacophony of voices filled the departure lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport, a place where weary travelers and eager tourists alike bustled around with their suitcases and carry-ons. Yet amidst the din of announcements and suitcase wheels on tile, one scene unfolded that no one could ignore: a trained K9 police dog lunging at a seemingly ordinary man. Gasps rippled through onlookers as the man's backpack fell to the floor, revealing something that halted both the dog and its handler in their tracks. In that moment, time stood still. What the crowd discovered left them speechless and forever changed. Aaron Delgado stepped onto the shiny floors of Terminal 4 at JFK, hefting an old, worn backpack over his shoulder. At 28, he was a man who carried more on his back than just physical weight. The ghost of a tragic past clung to his footsteps. His tousled dark hair and tired eyes suggested countless sleepless nights, and the rhythmic hitch in his breathing hinted at deeper anxieties stirring within. The airport was a swirl of bustling families, anxious tourists, and globe-trotting professionals. Aaron had always found airports both thrilling and suffocating. Thrilling because they symbolized new beginnings, but suffocating because they were also reminders of goodbyes. He was there to catch a flight to Sao Paulo, Brazil, on a mission that only he fully understood. Documents for his trip to the remote towns along the Amazon River were locked safely in a small side pocket of his backpack, but it wasn't the documents that weighed most heavily. Inside that backpack was an item so precious that its importance dwarfed everything else. Yet, outwardly, Aaron seemed like any other traveler, weaving through the crowds with halting confidence. Clutched in his left hand was a cup of Starbucks coffee, lukewarm, long forgotten as his mind raced with worry about making it through security without incident. He paused near the check-in kiosks, feeling the low hum of anxiety rumble in his stomach. For a moment, he entertained the notion of simply turning back. Every nerve in his body told him that something monumental awaited him on this journey. He stole a glance at the overhead monitors. Flight 809 to Sao Paulo on time. The glowing letters comforted him like an old friend whispering, "It's going to be okay." Taking a deep breath, Aaron repositioned his backpack. Little did he know, within the next hour, that unassuming piece of luggage would thrust him into a whirlwind of danger, misunderstanding, and revelations far beyond his wildest imagination. Moving to join the security line, Aaron had no inkling of what was about to happen. All he felt was the weight on his shoulders, emotional baggage woven with threads of hope, regret, and the promise he made to someone who was no longer there. As Aaron inched forward in line, his mind drifted back to the winding path that had led him here. He had grown up on the outskirts of Miami, in a small bungalow near Little Havana. Life had been simple, sometimes too simple, until his father's heart attack had changed everything in a single night. Aaron was only 14 then, and the loss had severed a crucial tether in his life. Soon, his ambitions twisted into survival mechanisms. By 16, he was running with the wrong crowd, careless teenagers flirting with petty crimes. A broken heart and a thirst for attention had led him astray, though he never dared to commit anything truly heinous. Mostly, it was minor vandalism, shoplifting candy bars, and sometimes even sneaking into abandoned buildings at night, just for the thrill of it. A part of him had been desperate to fill the gaping void left by his father's absence. But an arrest for stealing a bicycle at 18 had been the final straw. On that day, a policeman named Officer Marcus Ellis had seen something different in Aaron. Ellis had been the one to place handcuffs on Aaron's wrists, but instead of treating him like a criminal, the officer spoke to him like he was a lost kid. He offered him a second chance in the form of community service rather than jail. That compassionate intervention changed the trajectory of Aaron's life. Over the years, Aaron found a passion for volunteering, first at local shelters and later with international aid organizations. He poured his energies into helping orphaned children, homeless individuals, and eventually into protecting endangered communities and ecosystems. It was a personal atonement, a redemption arc for mistakes he could never fully erase from his memory. That's why he was in the departure line at JFK. He'd been chosen to help document efforts to save small fishing villages along the Amazon River from illegal logging and pollution. The invitation felt like destiny tapping him on the shoulder, reminding him that every new day was an opportunity to rewrite his story. And hidden in his backpack, sealed in a large Ziploc bag, lay the crucial item that tied everything together, a link to his father, the memory that had haunted him, and the promise that propelled him forward. A row of uniformed officers and dogs stood vigil near the security checkpoint. Among them was Officer Patrick O'Connell, a seasoned member of the NYPD K-9 unit assigned to airport security, and his partner, a German shepherd named Blaze. Blaze was renowned among airport staff for his impeccable sense of smell and keen instincts. He could detect illicit substances, explosives, or suspicious materials from a remarkable distance. Aaron noticed the pair from the corner of his eye as he placed his shoes in a grey plastic bin for the X-ray machine. Blaze's ears perked up, scanning the crowd with an intensity that made some travelers shift uneasily. But in Aaron's mind, this was routine. He had nothing to hide, at least nothing illegal. If anything, the only threat in his backpack was heartbreak and memory. Aaron's turn came. He walked through the metal detector, slightly tense. It beeped once, but the TSA officer motioned for him to step aside for a pat-down. A standard procedure. He complied with a cooperative nod, but as soon as the pat-down began, Blaze jerked his head in Aaron's direction, letting out a guttural bark that reverberated through the hall. "Hold up," Officer O'Connell said, gripping Blaze's leash more firmly. The dog strained against the restraint, gaze fixed on Aaron's backpack, which sat on the conveyor belt waiting to be scanned. People began to stare. Another bark, louder this time, tore through the air. The crowd murmured, some stepping back. Anxiety flared inside Aaron like wildfire. What is going on? A second officer grabbed the backpack. "We might have something here," he said cautiously. Aaron's heart pounded. He knew there was nothing dangerous inside, only the personal item that meant more to him than any piece of clothing or gadget. But how to explain that to a team trained to suspect wrongdoing? Blaze's nose twitched. The dog let out a low, menacing growl. The tension soared. "Sir, please step to the side," the TSA officer directed. Aaron complied. Already, he could feel the stares of strangers pressing in on him. It was a sensation of invisible shackles tying him to the worst moments of his past. He braced himself for scrutiny, telling himself, "Stay calm. You've done nothing wrong. Just explain." He had no idea that words alone might not diffuse what was about to happen. Officer O'Connell ushered Blaze forward, allowing the dog to sniff around the exterior of Aaron's backpack. Aaron stood a few feet away, unarmed except for the rising dread in his chest. The crowd behind him grew, with curious onlookers craning their necks to see the unfolding drama. Some recorded the event on their smartphones, while others simply watched with wary fascination. In a split second, Blaze jerked violently, lunging toward the backpack. The officer tried to hold him back, but the dog pulled free enough to clamp his jaws on the fabric. People gasped. Aaron's heart dropped into a free fall. Instinctively, he rushed toward his backpack, desperate to keep Blaze from tearing it open. The sudden movement set off an alarm in the dog's instincts, and Blaze switched focus from the backpack to Aaron himself. Before Aaron could register what was happening, the German shepherd's powerful body collided with him. The momentum threw him to the ground, backpack tumbling from his hands. Blaze snarled, pinning Aaron's arm. Pain shot through Aaron's forearm, but the searing fear of being mistaken for a criminal hit him even harder. He tried to keep still to avoid escalating the dog's aggression, but panic surged in his veins. "Blaze, down!" Officer O'Connell's voice thundered, echoing across the security area. Two other officers rushed in, yanking the dog away. Aaron rolled over, eyes wide, chest heaving. He could see a small tear in the backpack's outer pocket. Behind the frightened hush of the crowd, the beep of a new announcement overhead sounded bizarrely mundane. Seconds later, the other officers had Blaze back under control. Officer O'Connell bent down beside Aaron. "Are you hurt?" The man's tone was a mixture of concern and suspicion. Aaron cradled his arm, shaking with adrenaline. "I don't think so," he stammered. His voice felt detached from his body, overshadowed by a swarm of confusing emotions. At that moment, one of the TSA agents picked up Aaron's backpack. The tear from Blaze's jaws offered a glimpse of the item inside. A sharp gasp rippled through the onlookers. Aaron saw them staring, mouths half open in shock. The entire atmosphere shifted in a heartbeat. Whatever they saw inside that battered backpack had silenced everyone, including Blaze, who now stood quietly, ears folded back, tail still. Aaron lay on the cold tile floor, momentarily stunned by the suddenness of the attack. The shock of pain began to subside, replaced by a swirl of dread and humiliation. Two officers carefully helped him to his feet. Eyes from every corner of the security area bore into him. People looked at him the way they'd stare at an unexpected storm on a sunny day. A TSA agent held the torn backpack aloft, confusion etched across his face. The item that had caused Blaze's reaction was now partially visible through the shredded lining an old wooden box, about the size of a hardcover novel. Scrawled across its top in chipped paint was a name, Miguel Delgado. Officer O'Connell approached with a furrowed brow. "What's in the box?" His tone was demanding but not unkind. The drama of the dog attack had put everyone on edge, and the question hung in the air as though it were the pivot upon which the entire airport paused. Aaron swallowed hard. He could practically feel the lump in his throat, a pulsating knot of emotion. How could he possibly explain the story behind that wooden box in a single sentence? His father's ashes were inside, remains he had promised to scatter in the Amazon. A place his father had always dreamed of visiting, but never got the chance. It's my father," Aaron finally managed, voice choking. "His ashes." A hush settled over the security line. Several people audibly sucked in a breath. One traveler murmured, "Oh my God," while another pressed a hand to her heart. Officer O'Connell's gaze softened. His eyes darted from the wooden box to Aaron's face, taking in every detail of the young man's trembling features. I have the proper documentation," Aaron continued, searching through another pocket. With shaky hands, he retrieved official paperwork and a death certificate. "I was going to scatter them in Brazil." It was his dream. A wave of empathy rippled through onlookers. Even Blaze, who had moments ago been all snarls and teeth, now stood quietly by Officer O'Connell's side, tail low. The dog seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere, as if realizing he had mistaken heartbreak for danger. Aaron's eyes brimmed with tears, and he glanced around at the strangers surrounding him. In that moment, the illusions of guilt and suspicion crumbled, replaced by collective sympathy. Everyone could see this wasn't about smuggling or terror. It was the story of a son trying to fulfill a final wish. For a long moment, no one moved. The hum of fluorescent lights above them felt louder than any voice. Then Officer O'Connell cleared his throat, a sound that echoed in the stunned silence. "Aaron, is it?" he asked. spotting the name on the paperwork. Aaron nodded, still struggling to find words amid the emotional wreckage inside him. He felt an overwhelming urge to explain everything, not just the contents of the box, but the significance of what he was doing, how much it mattered, why it had to be Brazil, why it had to be now. "I'm really sorry for your loss," the officer offered quietly. His gaze flicked over to the throbbing bite mark on Aaron's forearm. "We need to get you checked by medical personnel." The tension that had coiled around the onlookers began to unwind as paramedics who had been standing by walked briskly over. They ushered Aaron to a nearby seat, asking him to roll up his sleeve. While they cleaned and bandaged the wound, Officer O'Connell spoke with the TSA agents, verifying Aaron's documentation. Moments later, the officer returned to Aaron's side. "I can't tell you how sorry I am about Blaze's reaction," O'Connell said, crouching down to Aaron's eye level. "He must have caught a strong scent or something he wasn't used to." Aaron nodded, swallowing a fresh lump in his throat. The memory of his father, tall, broad-shouldered Miguel Delgado, flashed through his mind. He saw his father playing with him as a child, teaching him how to fish, telling him stories about the exotic destinations he would one day visit. Then that final day came, along with a slow and agonizing heartbreak that forced Aaron to grow up too soon. "It's okay," he managed to whisper, voice thin. "I understand. Dogs have instincts." He was doing his job. As the medics finished wrapping his forearm, a TSA supervisor arrived. She spoke quietly with Officer O'Connell for a moment before turning to Aaron. "We can clear you to fly, but we need a few more checks." She softened her tone. "We appreciate your cooperation." Nodding, Aaron tried to stand. His legs wobbled. The adrenaline that had fueled him moments ago was draining fast. But with each breath, the initial shock began to recede, replaced by a tangible sense of relief. The worst thing he'd imagined had happened. He'd been attacked and suspected in public, and yet it was all unraveling in a much different, more compassionate way than he'd feared. The onlookers gradually dispersed, called by boarding announcements or simply realizing they had to move on with their own travel agendas. Still, a few people lingered, some out of concern, others out of curiosity. A pair of elderly women approached Aaron, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "We're so sorry about your father," one of them offered softly. "God bless you." Another man, who had been filming on his phone, sheepishly tucked the device away. Guilt flickered across his features. "I hope you're okay," he muttered. Sorry, man." Aaron managed a small, grateful smile, though his heart still pounded. It was surreal, this sudden shift from being treated like a threat to being enveloped in empathy. Part of him wanted to retreat into himself, but something about this moment demanded he remain open. Being vulnerable was uncomfortable, yet it felt oddly healing to have people see his grief and respond with kindness. Meanwhile, Officer O'Connell guided Blaze away from the immediate crowd, giving the dog a chance to calm down. Aaron could see the officer stroking Blaze's head, murmuring words only the dog could hear. A pang of empathy lanced through him. He didn't blame Blaze. The German shepherd had simply misread a scent. In a strange way, the dog's confusion reminded Aaron of his own life, how easy it was to mistake one feeling for another, to lash out when threatened or wounded. A TSA agent returned the wooden box, now carefully wrapped in a plastic bag for inspection. She set it on the seat beside Aaron. "All set," she told him, offering a polite smile. "Again, our apologies for the inconvenience." Aaron gently placed the box back into his backpack, running a hand over the worn surface. "I'm so close, Dad," he thought, tears prickling behind his eyes. "Soon you'll be where you always dreamed." He zipped the pack, mindful of the torn flap. A wave of exhaustion swept over him, but also a subtle stirring of hope. In less than an hour, he had experienced fear, humiliation, and compassion from strangers. The emotional whiplash was profound. What if this was just the beginning of a journey that would break him down only to build him back up? "Resilience," he reminded himself, a lesson learned through hard knocks. And so he stayed seated, collecting himself for the final stretch to his departure gate, determined to continue this odyssey despite the bruises both visible and hidden. After clearing the remaining security steps, Aaron found himself hurrying through the busy corridors of JFK, determined not to miss his flight. His bandaged arm throbbed, but he told himself the pain was manageable, a small price to pay to keep his promise. The overhead announcements chimed, reminding passengers heading to Sao Paulo that final boarding would commence soon. Clutching his ticket, Aaron navigated past the food court, inhaling a pungent mix of pizza and fried chicken. The scents made his stomach churn, not from hunger, but from nerves. Each step felt monumental, as if the future hinged on whether he could place one foot in front of the other without faltering. He flashed back to the chaotic scene in security. He could still feel the weight of Blaze on his arm, the fierce growl in his ears. A cold shiver ran through him, followed by a wave of gratitude. How easily the situation could have ended more disastrously, with injuries or even an arrest. His past might have condemned him in the eyes of law enforcement, had it not been for the empathy and quick thinking of Officer O'Connell. As he neared his gate, he spotted a television screen replaying a news segment. A reporter was discussing an entirely different airport event, someone famous arriving in New York. But it made him wonder if the incident with Blaze might show up on social media or even local news. The thought sent a ripple of anxiety through him, but he forced it away. There was nothing to be done about that now. He had to focus on his mission. He arrived at gate 37B just as they announced, "All passengers, please proceed to final boarding." Relief washed over him. Showing his boarding pass and passport, he made his way onto the jet bridge. The mechanical hum of the plane's engines thrummed like a heartbeat in the background. Soon, he would be seated, strapped in for the long flight over oceans and continents, carrying a precious cargo that transcended simple belongings. As he stepped onto the plane, Aaron allowed himself a moment of introspection. "Dad, I'm still doing it. No matter what tries to stop me, I'm keeping my word." He whispered the words under his breath, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the buoyancy of a promise that refused to die. The cabin lights in the plane's economy section glowed a soft amber, illuminating rows of weary travelers settling into their seats. Aaron slid into his assigned seat near the window, his trusty though now torn backpack placed gently beneath the seat in front of him. He fastened his seatbelt, exhaling slowly. The plane felt like a little universe unto itself, a collective crossing of paths propelled through the sky. To his left sat an older woman, her hair streaked with grey. She offered Aaron a kind smile as he struggled to make himself comfortable with one hand somewhat stiff from the bandage. "Rough day?" she asked gently, noticing his wrapped arm. Aaron hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but the kindness in her eyes nudged his guard down. "You could say that," he replied with a lopsided grin. "Airport security misunderstandings." She patted his armrest reassuringly. "Airports can be stressful. I'm headed back home to Sao Paulo. You visiting?" Aaron paused, unsure how to articulate his reason without delving into the entire story. "Yes," he finally said. "I'm completing something important for my father." The woman seemed to understand that was all he cared to say. She nodded sympathetically and returned to her book, a Portuguese language guide to the works of Jorge Amado. In the lull, Aaron gazed out the window. The runway's lights dotted the darkness, guiding planes like luminous breadcrumbs. Overhead bins slammed as latecomers stowed their luggage. Flight attendants rattled through safety checks. His thoughts drifted to the wooden box. Would Dad be proud of who I've become? He wondered. A pang of regret for his troubled youth flickered in his chest. Yet he reminded himself that real growth often rose from the muddiest roots. It was the reason he volunteered, the reason he saved every penny to travel for philanthropic work, and the reason he now carried a father's ashes across the globe. He closed his eyes, recalling Officer Marcus Ellis, the policeman who'd once shown him mercy, hoping that his father, somewhere, was grateful for that man's kindness. If a single compassionate act from a stranger could alter the course of a life, what ripple effects might wait for him in the Amazon? Soon, the engines roared, the plane sped down the runway, and gravity gave way to flight. Pressed back against his seat, Aaron felt the literal and metaphorical lift. The hardest part was behind him, or so he believed. Dawn was just breaking over Sao Paulo when the plane touched down at Guarulhos International Airport. Bright pink and orange streaks painted the horizon, a contrast to the grey cityscape below. Aaron rubbed the sleep from his eyes, disoriented by hours of flight and restless dozing. His bandaged arm ached with a dull throb. Collecting his belongings, Aaron shuffled off the plane and navigated the foreign signs leading to customs. A wave of fatigue battered him, but adrenaline and the urgent purpose of his trip kept him upright. Once he cleared immigration, he found himself in the arrivals area, where the hum of Portuguese conversations buzzed around him like bees. His next challenge would be another flight to Manaus, the gateway city to the Amazon rainforest. Only there, beyond the hum of modern civilization, could he begin the real journey to scatter his father's ashes in the place he'd dreamt of exploring. But first, he needed to confirm arrangements with the local conservation organization he'd volunteered with. They would guide him into the deeper reaches of the rainforest, where small communities battled rampant deforestation. Aaron fumbled with his phone, searching for a local SIM card kiosk. He needed a functioning phone to coordinate with the organization. A polite attendant helped him set up a prepaid plan. Once he regained connectivity, a flurry of messages from the NGO's liaison, Rafaela, filled his inbox. "Welcome to Brazil, Aaron. Let us know when you've arrived so we can confirm your flight to Manaus and get you situated." He responded quickly, letting her know he was through customs. She replied with an address to meet her at Terminal 2 for a briefing over breakfast. For a moment, the swirl of details left him breathless. He was a foreigner with an important, highly personal mission, yet an undercurrent of anticipation lit his senses. He was doing something meaningful, bridging the memory of his father with the needs of communities fighting for their land. Clutching his torn backpack, he made his way to Terminal 2. Each step echoed with the reminder that he was fulfilling a promise one he'd made while standing at his father's hospital bedside. Pressing his trembling hand over Miguel Delgado's feeble one, vowing to bring him to the Amazon, Aaron exhaled a shaky breath, buoyed by a sense of purpose that shimmered beneath every moment of uncertainty. Rafaela was a warm, energetic woman in her early 40s, with curly black hair and a smile that radiated genuine welcome. She had arrived at the small cafe in Terminal 2 before Aaron and rose from her seat as soon as she spotted him. "Aaron, bom dia!" She extended a hand, then pulled him into a quick, friendly embrace, the Brazilian way. "I'm Rafaela. So good to finally meet you in person." Aaron offered a shy grin, the remnants of anxiety still evident in his eyes. "Nice to meet you too." He set his backpack down carefully, conscious of its vulnerable tier. "Thank you for all your help arranging this." They sat at a corner table, sipping strong coffee that smelled of roasted earth and smoky sweetness. The cafe bustled with travelers, flight crews, and local families waiting to greet returning relatives. Rafaela wasted no time pulling out a map of Brazil, tracing the route they would take, a flight to Manaus, then a boat journey up the Rio Negro, and finally a short trek to reach remote communities near the reserve. "You'll be working alongside our research team, documenting the impact of illegal logging," Rafaela explained, her finger gliding over the green tapestry of the Amazon basin on the map. We're also trying to help the local fishermen who rely on these waters. They've been forced out by pollution and overfishing. It's quite urgent. Aaron nodded, absorbing her words. I'm ready. This is important, he said, though his mind flickered to the wooden box and his personal mission. He debated whether to reveal the nature of his cargo to Rafaela, but decided to wait until they were en route and away from the busy airport. She tapped her phone and confirmed their next flight, turning back to him with a smile. We'll leave in 2 hours. That's enough time to pick up any supplies you need. Do you have everything? Most of what I need is in here, Aaron said, patting the backpack. Despite the tear, the rest of his gear remained intact. A wave of relief washed over him. His father's ashes were safe. Rafaela glanced at his bandaged arm. What happened? She asked gently. He hesitated, then chuckled wryly. Airport security dog in New York. Long story. The concern in her eyes mirrored the empathy he had encountered from strangers at JFK. Her hand briefly rested on his forearm. I'm sorry, she said simply. You must be exhausted. Tired. Yes, he admitted, but hopeful. By late afternoon, Aaron and Rafaela touched down in Manaus, a city brimming with rich history and cultural vibrancy at the gateway to the Amazon. The tropical humidity clung to them the moment they stepped off the plane, and palm trees swayed in a faint breeze. A small team from the NGO waited in an open jeep, smiling broadly. They introduced themselves in English and Portuguese. Aaron did his best to respond with basic phrases he'd learned, which earned him appreciative laughter. There was Joao, a sturdy man with a kind face, in charge of logistics, and Marina, a skilled biologist specializing in freshwater ecosystems. Together, they drove to the harbor where battered wooden boats lined the docks. As Aaron climbed aboard a modest vessel outfitted with supplies, he felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't just the boat rocking beneath his feet, it was the feeling that he was stepping closer to fulfilling an unspoken destiny. The Rio Negro stretched out before him like a mirror tinted by the sediment of the rainforest, capturing the sky and clouds in its reflective waters. They pushed off, and the boat's engines sputtered to life, sending them gliding over the shimmering surface. Flocks of brightly colored birds swooped overhead, calling out in a chorus of chirps and squawks. Marina pointed out the lush greenery on either bank, tall trees with gnarled roots, vines snaking around massive trunks, and a canopy so dense that sunlight filtered through in patches of gold. Every sense came alive for Aaron, the rumbling engine beneath his feet, the sticky heat on his skin, the scent of wet earth and river musk. He had dreamed of this moment for so long, though it was his father's dream first. The weight of the wooden box in his backpack felt heavier now, as if it could sense how close it was to its final resting place. Rafaela explained their route, shouting above the engine noise. They'd sail upriver for a day and a half, stopping to meet local communities along the way, delivering supplies and documenting stories of environmental struggle. Aaron nodded, absorbing every detail. He knew he would have to ask for a quiet moment, somewhere remote and peaceful to honor his father's memory. But as he watched the bank slip by, he also felt a shift deep within himself. The journey wasn't just about bringing Miguel Delgado to the place he'd loved in dreams. It was also about discovering who Aaron was becoming in the process. As dusk painted the western sky in swirls of orange and violet, the boat glided steadily deeper into the heart of the Amazon. The river widened under the fading light, its surface reflecting the first stars timidly appearing overhead. A warm glow from a single lantern on the boat's modest roof cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating the faces of Aaron and his companions. The rhythmic puttering of the outboard motor served as a lullaby, coaxing the jungle into its nocturnal chorus. Throughout the late afternoon, the team had traveled past remote fishing hamlets and stretches of dense forest where massive trees reached skyward, their tops dissolving into the leafy canopy. Everywhere Aaron looked, life flourished, whether it was a glimpse of a capybara nibbling grass on the shore or the flutter of multi-hued parrots silhouetted against the sun's last rays. Despite the wonder unfolding all around, he couldn't shake the sense that this day, with all its tiny, extraordinary moments, was edging him closer to a pivotal juncture in his life. Night descended swiftly in the Amazon. By the time the sky turned a deep indigo, the boat was fully enveloped in the darkness, save for the dancing glow of lantern light. With João at the helm and Marina scanning the banks for signs of wildlife, Aaron found himself leaning against the boat's wooden railing, peering at the moon's reflection on the river's inky surface. The throbbing in his bandaged arm had mellowed to a dull ache, overshadowed by the steady hum of thoughts coursing through his mind. Rafaela, finishing a conversation with the boat's captain, approached Aaron and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. She pointed to a small cluster of lights ahead, a modest settlement perched on the water's edge. "We'll spend the night there," she said. "The locals have a safe place for us to dock, and there's a communal space where we can rest." Aaron nodded, grateful for the plan. As they drew closer, he observed half a dozen thatched huts raised on wooden pilings, lit by lanterns swinging in the soft evening breeze. Voices and laughter drifted over the water, accompanied by the faint throb of distant music. Children dashed along a plank walkway, trying to catch flickering fireflies with cupped hands. Once the boat was secured, the group disembarked onto a narrow, wobbly pier. A handful of villagers greeted them, curiosity lighting their expressions. Marina introduced herself and Rafaela, explaining that they were with an NGO focused on environmental research and community support. Aaron followed quietly, choosing to observe rather than speak. He could feel the wooden box in his backpack pressing against him, its presence a constant reminder of his own unique purpose. Under a makeshift shelter, they shared a simple meal of rice, beans, and fresh fish, flavored with local herbs that lent a warm, comforting aroma. The villagers were shy but welcoming, offering timid smiles and nods. A few men returning from an evening fishing trip joked about how they had to watch for caimans lurking near the riverbanks. Their easy camaraderie spoke volumes about the bond. They shared an unspoken understanding that the land and the water were inseparable from their daily existence. As they ate, shadows flickered on the walls of the shelter, cast by lantern flames dancing in the nighttime air. The melodic chirr of cicadas and the far-off croaking of frogs filled the silence between conversations. Though exhaustion tugged at Aaron's eyelids, the surreal beauty of the moment kept him alert. It felt as if the entire world had collapsed into this one speck in the jungle, a floating lantern of humanity in the dark. After dinner, Rafaela led the group back to the boat, where they would sleep. Space was cramped, but a sense of communal warmth replaced any discomfort. They laid out rolled-up mats on the deck, using spare blankets to cushion themselves from the hard wooden floor. Before lying down, Aaron found himself drawn to the boat's edge once more. The night sky was alive with stars brighter than any he had ever seen back home. He couldn't help but think of his father in these moments of cosmic wonder, imagining how Miguel Delgado would have marveled at the sheer splendor of nature all around. Sensing Aaron's preoccupation, Rafaela came to stand beside him. The lantern cast gentle shadows across her face. "You seem lost in thought," she observed quietly. Aaron's gaze flicked to the bandage on his forearm, a tangible souvenir of what felt like a lifetime ago, his confrontation with Blaze, the police dog. "It's been a long journey to get here," he murmured, his voice barely rising above the river's hush. "I keep thinking about how everything that happened led me to this exact moment." the good and the bad. She regarded him with empathy, then turned her eyes to the darkened canopy lining the river's edge. The Amazon has a way of stripping everything down to the essentials. Out here, you confront your fears, your regrets, your hopes. There's nowhere to hide. Aaron swallowed hard, emotion rippling through him. In the moonlight, the battered backpack seemed more symbolic than ever, cradling the wooden box he would soon open in the heart of this wilderness. He felt both a weight and a sense of anticipation, a tether of grief, mingling with an undercurrent of quiet resolve. "It's like I'm finally moving forward," he said, inhaling the cool night air. "And every step I take brings me closer to facing what I've been carrying for so long." Rafaela offered a soft smile. "That's the essence of a pilgrimage, isn't it? Each step, not just toward a destination, but toward understanding yourself." Together, they stood in silence, listening to the murmur of the river, the rustle of palm fronds overhead, and the gentle laughter of villagers enjoying the twilight hours. Gradually, fatigue claimed Aaron, and he stifled a yawn. With a nod, Rafaela signaled for them to settle down. The promise of another early morning on the river beckoned. Drifting off under the sprawling canopy of stars, Aaron clung to a single thought. He was not merely traveling across a physical landscape, but journeying inward, each bend in the river, revealing a new facet of his soul. And as he closed his eyes, lulled by the soft lullaby of the Amazon at night, he felt an unfamiliar flicker of peace take root in the spaces where anxiety once reigned. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the boat had navigated deeper into the winding tributaries of the Amazon, its heartbeat thrumming beneath every rippled wave. A gauzy haze rose from the water under the fierce tropical sun, rendering the riverbanks in soft outlines. On either side of the boat, the lush vegetation seemed endless, thousands of shades of green, layered in a mesmerizing tapestry. Giant trees draped with vines stood like watchful guardians, their roots gripping the earth with ancient resolve. Each bend in the river felt like stepping through a doorway into another realm, one more pristine and awe-inspiring than the last. Aaron perched near the bow, letting the warm breeze graze his face. Despite the humidity, it felt refreshing, as if nature itself was gently guiding him to remain present in each moment. His bandaged arm throbbed less now. The excitement and purpose fueling him seemed to dull the ache. Whenever he glanced down at his trusty but battered backpack, a mixture of anticipation and relief knotted in his chest. His father's ashes lay safely within, waiting for the right time and place to be set free. The small crew, Rafaela, João, Marina, and the local boat captain, operated like a well-rehearsed ensemble. João, in charge of logistics, was constantly checking the small outboard motor and adjusting their route, while Marina kept her binoculars close, scanning the riverbanks for wildlife. Occasionally, she'd gesture at a splash of color, cutting through the foliage a toucan or a scarlet macaw, and call Aaron over to see. He would snap a quick photo or scribble a note in his ever-present journal, grateful for these moments of discovery. Just before midday, the group arrived at a modest settlement built on stilts, the wooden structures raised above the water level to withstand seasonal flooding. Children raced down rickety walkways, their laughter echoing across the river. The entire village seemed to radiate an unspoken unity, forged in the face of the challenges the Amazon often presented: flooding, isolation, and the persistent threat of illegal logging. Rafaela introduced Aaron to the community leader, a wiry man named Celso with sun-darkened skin and a ready smile. Together, they distributed a small cache of supplies, medicines, mosquito nets, and educational materials about sustainable fishing practices. The villagers greeted them with genuine warmth, their curiosity piqued by Aaron's foreign accent and the bandage on his arm. In between handing out supplies, Aaron captured photos and jotted down brief interviews in his journal, wanting to record each face and story. A group of fishermen showed him the tear in one of their nets, a small but crucial reminder of how easily livelihoods could be undone in this environment. Although his Portuguese was limited, Rafaela translated his questions and their answers, painting a portrait of a community determined to adapt and survive. Amid the bustle, an elderly woman approached. Her steps were slow but purposeful, and her gaze held both kindness and wisdom. She reached for Aaron's wrist, her fingertips cool against his pulse. Speaking in hushed Portuguese, she uttered words he didn't understand until Rafaela quietly translated. She says, "You carry sorrow, but also a great love. She thanks you for bringing your spirit here." Caught off guard, Aaron felt emotion well up in his chest. The woman pressed a small carved figurine into his hand, an intricately shaped river dolphin fashioned from local wood. It reminded him of the pink dolphins he'd heard about, rumored to be protectors of the Amazon's waters. Then, with surprising tenderness, she leaned forward, touching her forehead to his. In that brief, silent gesture, Aaron felt an uncanny sense of acceptance, as though his own grief and purpose had found a soft place to land in this remote outpost of humanity. "Obrigado," he whispered, using one of the few Portuguese words he knew well. The woman smiled, revealing gaps where age had claimed several teeth, but her warmth was unmistakable. Soon it was time to depart. As the boat motored away from the village, Aaron's thoughts lingered on its people, the bright-eyed children waving from the docks, the stoic fishermen holding tattered nets, and the gentle elder who seemed to see right through to his heart. The figurine rested in his palm, a symbol of gratitude and a quiet promise that he would remember this place long after he returned home. They pressed on, the vessel navigating ever narrower channels. Emerald leaves danced in the golden sunlight filtering through the canopy, and the jungle's chorus of buzzing insects and chattering animals grew more insistent. Hours slipped by in a near meditative rhythm of boat engine hum and lapping water. Here, time did not follow the frenetic pace of city life. It advanced like a patient tide. Rafaela finally signaled João to slow the boat as they entered a particularly serene stretch of the river. Massive trees lined the banks, their branches forming a natural archway overhead. Somewhere high in the canopy, a flock of parrots exploded in a riot of bright feathers, squawking in unison. The sunlight scattered through the dense leaves, casting lace like patterns across the water's surface. "Look," Rafaela said softly, gesturing to a small clearing on the shore. Her voice was filled with an almost reverential awe. "We're close to the place I told you about, where the water runs still at sunset. It's one of the most peaceful spots I've seen in the Amazon." Aaron nodded, his heart pounding. This was precisely the sort of hidden sanctuary he'd hoped for, a place unclaimed by crowds, where the river took on a gentle hush that seemed to resonate with the very core of his mission. As the boat eased toward the narrow, sandy embankment, a flutter of emotions, relief, nervousness, and an abiding sense of reverence took hold of him. Rafaela caught his eye. "Whenever you're ready," she murmured. As João cut the engine, the boat drifted to a stop, and the lines were tied to a jutting route along the shoreline. Everyone on board seemed to sense that Aaron needed this moment. No more words were necessary. Stepping onto the bank, Aaron inhaled the damp, earthy scent of the forest. Vibrant ferns and twisted roots framed a small path leading into the lush undergrowth, while overhead vines dangled like ancient curtains. He glanced back at the crew, each of them waiting patiently and respectfully on the boat. Then he carefully lifted his torn backpack, cradling it as though it were fragile glass. Inside rested the wooden box bearing his father's name, a beloved cargo that had traveled thousands of miles to reach this precise point on Earth. In that instant, the significance of his journey flooded him like the rising tide. He had come all this way to honor a promise, and, in doing so, had discovered an uncharted realm within himself, a place of healing and acceptance. The soft calls of the rainforest creatures seemed to echo that sentiment, as if every element of this landscape conspired to welcome both father and son into its vast, unbroken heart. Aaron stepped off the boat onto a narrow, sandy embankment, feeling the silt of the riverbed sink beneath his shoes. The air was thick with the scent of wet foliage and humus, and the humidity wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Towers of ancient trees stood guard over this tranquil spot, their roots dipping into the water as if offering a silent welcome. Rafaela, João, and Marina gave him space, hanging back near the boat while Aaron ventured forward. Time seemed to slow. He knelt by the river's edge and gently set his torn backpack on the ground. His heart pounded with a mix of apprehension and reverence. With careful hands, he removed the wooden box, Miguel Delgado's final resting place. He traced the faded letters of his father's name, recalling 1,000 small moments from childhood. The way his father's laughter boomed in their small house, the nights they'd spent lying on the grass counting stars, the stories about the Amazon's biodiversity that had filled Aaron's young mind with wonder. Memories fluttered through him like the wings of a hummingbird, swift and vibrant. Aaron inhaled the damp, earthy smell around him and exhaled slowly, trying to summon the courage to complete this sacred task. At last, he opened the box. Inside lay a modest bag of ashes. A sudden wave of emotion overwhelmed him. He thought of the teenage missteps, the heartbreak, the second chances, and how his father had always wanted more for him than Aaron had wanted for himself at times. "I'm sorry it took me so long," he whispered. Tears stained his cheeks. "But I'm here, Dad. I made it." He lifted the bag, loosening its opening with trembling fingers. A soft breeze rustled the treetops as he scattered the ashes over the water. Grey particles merged with the river's surface, carried gently away by the current. For a heartbeat, he swore he could feel his father's presence, vibrant, curious, and profoundly at peace. Behind him, Rafaela and the others watched in respectful silence. Even the jungle seemed to quiet for a moment, as if bowing to the significance of this gesture. Aaron remained kneeling, tears dripping onto the sand. The river's gentle movement carried the ashes deeper into the heart of the Amazon, weaving Miguel Delgado's essence into the very ecosystem he adored from afar. When the final ashes were gone, Aaron closed the empty wooden box and placed it on his lap. A stillness settled over him, an unspoken sense of completion. This had been more than an errand of grief. It was a testament to love's enduring power. In fulfilling his father's dream, Aaron felt his own spirit ignite, like a seed planted in fertile ground at long last. He stood up slowly, lifting his gaze to the canopy, where a macaw flew overhead in a burst of color. As sunlight bent through the leaves, illuminating the river with a dazzling glow, Aaron felt a surge of gratitude. He looked back at Rafaela, who offered a supportive nod. In the quiet hush of the Amazon, Aaron realized he was not just scattering ashes, he was sowing resilience, connection, and personal growth in the fertile soil of his own future. It was here, in the land his father once fantasized about, that Aaron finally felt he belonged, not in the prisons of his past mistakes, but in the wide open arms of hope. Thank you for witnessing Aaron's powerful journey, a testament to resilience, connection, and personal growth. From a tense confrontation at JFK Airport with a vigilant police dog, to scattering his father's ashes in the heart of the Amazon, Aaron's story shows us that life's greatest challenges often lead to its most profound transformations. If you found meaning or inspiration in this story, please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends who might also be touched by Aaron's experiences, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps us continue creating content that uplifts, enlightens, and reminds us all that compassion can bridge worlds even when we least expect it. Thank you for journeying with us, and may Aaron's courage spark new beginnings in your own life. Safe travels wherever your path leads next.